I spent 10 days practicing in Portimao with the Ferrari GT3. The goal here is to reach the 142 zone, so here's how that went. On the first day before even starting, my lap time that I had done previously was a 143.7. So I wanted to go step by step and slowly lower the lap time to reach the 142 zone. I played around with brake balance because I wanted to make sure that my tires were not overheating, nor the fronts nor the rears, to make sure that I maximize the grip of the car. I played around with a brake balance of 49.1 to 50.1. And I was really enjoying the understeer that the brake balance was giving me if I was switching to the 50% brake balance. Understeering was pretty good because it wasn't overheating my rear tires, so it was easier to control overall. But I also did play with the 49.1 brake balance, which was the initial brake balance that the game was giving me when I was logging into the racetrack. And after a while, even that brake balance wasn't as difficult to control, and I could see that I was still not overheating my tires while also getting better rotation. I had to be a bit careful on the brakes though, because it was really easy to lock up or actually activate the ABS for the fronts, and that would slow me down a lot. Braking a bit softer than you would think actually did wonders to improve my lap time, and in the end of the day I did by 1/10, and I was able to go to a 143.6. On day 2, I stayed consistent with the brake balance that I had chosen the previous day, so I stuck with 49.1 brake balance. But as I was going on, I was thinking that maybe this was just too much of a rear brake balance to have, and maybe it was overheating the tires a little bit more than I needed to. So I just did like one click more positive to the fronts, and it went to the 49.3 brake balance. But overall, my mindset remained the same. The point was to not overheat my tires and make sure that I maximize grip, while of course braking in the proper way so I induce oversteer and get more rotation out of the car. While of course not ever actually oversteering, because that would just slow me down and overheat the tires. And then at the end of the day, I was able to improve my lap time even more to a 143.5. On day 3, things started becoming more interesting. I decided to reduce my brake balance a bit more since I was able to control the car in a lower brake balance so far. So I went with a 48.5 brake balance. That would allow me to brake much better. In a lot of the corners, I was able to brake later than before and also get much more rotation. I had to be much more careful this time around because the rear tires would easily overheat at this point. So I had to make sure that I trail brake properly so I don't do that. At the end of the day, I wasn't able to lower my lap time, but I was starting to get used to a different type of braking style where I could brake harder and trail brake differently so I don't overheat my rear tires. On day 4, I continued the trend of lowering my brake bias. Since I saw if I trail brake properly, I would not be oversteering or overheating the rear tires, and I used a brake bias of 48.1. This low brake bias made me a bit more cautious about how I was braking, and then it hit me that at this point I'm not really inducing oversteer, but I need to induce understeer. I could easily achieve more rotation than induce oversteer, but at this point, because it was so easy to oversteer, I needed to start trying to intentionally reduce the rotation that I was getting from the car so I would not overheat the rear tires, so I was inducing understeer. That meant that I would start to release the brakes a bit faster. So I wasn't really braking hard for a long period of time. I would release really quickly, so I make sure that I enter with a little bit more speed into the corner, which would cause the front tires to understeer, or almost understeer. Even after my realization, I still wasn't able to lower my lap time, but I knew that there was something there at this point, and I was looking forward to the next day. On day 5, I continued with the mindset that I had on the previous day, so I was intentionally inducing understeer since I could see that I was easily getting oversteer at this point. I used the same settings from the previous day, so the brake bias remained at 48.1, and I was still getting used to it, because I could see the potential, but I was still not perfectly doing these techniques. I was not perfectly trail braking all the time, nor was I inducing the necessary understeer. Sometimes I was really hesitant to steer the steering wheel a bit more. That would induce understeer as well, but sometimes I was just not steering enough, even though the car was able to steer more. So it was a quick day and I was not able to lower my lap time. I'm not gonna lie, I was getting a bit frustrated seeing that I was not improving, even though I was learning a few more things throughout the day. And that frustration was enhanced when I was seeing that I was barely getting out of the 144 zones. But nonetheless, it's part of the game, so I didn't let the doubts consume me for too long. On day 6, I continued with the same mindset and the same settings, and overall I could feel that I was better handling the car and I was getting used to the lower brake bias. I was able to lower my lap time by just a couple of fractions of a second, but still enough to make me boost my confidence and move forward for the next day. On day 7, I decided to lower my brake bias even more, since I saw that I lowered my lap time last time around, so I thought I could just keep on increasing the rear brake bias until I feel like it's getting too much. So on day 7 I had to get used to it again, but my mindset remained the same. I was just trying to induce understeer whenever I was feeling that the rears were getting loose. And of course, as I'm recording this and as I'm saying this, it's easier said than done, really, because all this time, even though I know what I have to do, it's really difficult to actually do it on track. So I would say that I have a lot of room for improvement before I get this technique down. Also, what I want to say, just a quick note for the track Portimao, that first hairpin in the third sector was and is so difficult for me to get right. Like, I'm really not sure about the racing line for that corner yet, and it looks really simple, but for me I just can't wrap my head around what I gotta do. So I'll just have to analyze it a little bit more before I start driving again. So at the end of day 7, I was not able to lower my lap time, but I still felt like there was something there. On day 8, 9, and 10, nothing substantial happened. I wasn't able to lower my lap time, but I was getting frustrated that I wasn't able to lower my lap time. Although right now I feel like that's just part of the game, and I'm looking forward to see what I can do next time around. I realized something that made me lower my brake bias even more, even though I wasn't seeing any improvement from it. That is because I was noticing that I would still get a bit more rotation if I completely released the brakes than if I was trail braking, which meant that there was still a bit more force in the front brakes and the front tires that made the car understeer a little bit as I was turning. So you could say that I just needed to lift off the brakes a bit more so the tires would not understeer. But I was also thinking that if I do that, then I will have to brake sooner in order to be able to release the brakes even more as I'm diving into the corner. So that's one way to do it, but I also wanted to try and lower my brake bias even more so that less pressure was going in the front tires, and maybe that way I could still brake hard and still not over rotate, but just enter the corner with more speed. And that's where I'm currently at. I'm not sure if that's the way to do it or if I just have to brake sooner and increase my brake bias a little bit more so it's not as low as the 47, which is right now. Only time will tell. This is just where I'm at right now. I'm looking forward to the following days to see how that plays out. But yeah, this is pretty much it for the first 10 days of me doing this documentation. I'd be really happy to hear your thoughts on this video because I'm thinking of doing a whole series based on this. The plan is to stick with Portimao until I am able to lower the lap time to where I want it to be. The point why I'm not racing in any other tracks at the moment is because I want to make sure that I get the techniques down perfectly before I start learning a new track. If I learn a new track right now, then I would just make a couple of steps back because I would just have to focus on learning the racing lines for that specific track, and I don't think I should be taking any steps backwards at the moment. I want to stick to this track and make sure that I get the driving techniques down before I move on to the next tracks. And I have to say, I am following the same route that I was following when I was practicing in the MX-5. The only difference is that right now, I really do not feel stressed out or burned out from this whole experience. I'm actually enjoying this process, even though I'm not changing tracks or that I'm not racing with anybody. I'm just happy to learn these few tiny things that I can improve on so I can get faster, and that keeps me motivated to keep on going for this track. So yeah, that is pretty much it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.